From New York to our Bloomberg television and radio audiences worldwide, this is Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. I'm David Weston. When we left you yesterday, that stimulus package was a sure thing. Today, not so much, when President Trump released a video last evening saying that he really was insulted by the fact that it was only $600 going to individuals, and in fact, we needed to have it go up to $2,000 for individuals, $4,000 for couples. We want to turn now to our political contributor. She is Jeannie Zaino, who is Iona College professor of political science. So, Jeannie, the president surprised me. I think may have surprised some other people. He's been sort of quiet. Does he mean it? He didn't say he'd veto it, but he demanded this remarkable increase in the individual payments.
Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely a wild night in Washington, I think, for everybody to see this video released on Twitter by the president, who, really has been absent from negotiations. We haven't really seen him in public for 10 days, to come out at the nth hour and, as you said, not threaten to veto, but demand changes to the package. He wants an increase to $2,000, which, of course, Democrats welcomed. We saw Nancy Pelosi tweeting, she's happy to go to unanimous consent to get there. But, of course, this is the nth hour, and the problem is the calendar and the fact that we are facing a pending government shutdown. And, of course, as we see record numbers of people, and I know you're going to be talking to Fauci later on, record numbers of people getting COVID, people unfortunately passing away, we need federal money to get the vaccines out there. So all of this really, I think, has many people scratching their heads as to what the president is going to do and what he actually really wants.
And what does this do to his Republican allies? I think they're up on Capitol Hill, the Mitch McConnells of this world, who worked so hard, fought so hard, and for that matter, Steve Mnuchin as well.
Yeah, absolutely. This creates lots of problems for the Republicans. The Republicans' races in Georgia, which are going to obviously on January 5th decide control of the Senate. We saw him take on very publicly Thune and McConnell, who have very slowly moved away from his demands to overturn the Electoral College victory for Biden. And there is a school of thought that that's really what he is responding to here, his frustration with his own party, that he is going to throw a monkey wrench into this, hard-fought negotiation on the part of Congress. We haven't, at least as far as I've heard Mitch McConnell respond to this. So we don't quite know what they're thinking. But again, the options are he vetoes this, Congress can override, but that would take some time for them to get back into D.C. They've all gone home for Christmas holidays to do that. He can do nothing, which would be a pocket veto. That would push this out 10 days. And, of course, he could sign it. And I think all three of those options are things that could potentially happen. But I think, there are economists, many of them who agree with him this package isn't sufficient, but they also understand that it's imperfect, it's late, we needed to do better, but it's better than nothing at this point. And so, we're really seeing sort of the crossover between those two schools of thought.
Yeah, I have to say, the one thing I think is clear from this is he's regained center stage. There was a time there where we were hearing more from President-elect Biden. We were hearing a lot from him about various things, including that cyber hack. And now, boy, he's center stage once again. Everybody's talking about what President Trump wants and doesn't want.
Yeah, he's not going to go quietly into the good night, as they say. He's going to make his voice heard. And, I think, again, though, it is a question of what this does to his presidency and what it does to his own Republican Party and, of course, what it does to Americans suffering from COVID relief. Because let's not forget, if he doesn't sign or if he vetoes and the government does indeed shut down because of the calendar we're looking at, that puts off the ability of the federal government to move those vaccines, amongst other things, people, not being paid for their federal jobs. That's a huge hit for the federal government and the American people. So there are lots of, shoes that would drop, if you will, if he doesn't sign or if he vetoes this thing. I can't imagine that would happen, but I didn't imagine the video coming out late last night either.
Exactly. I don't think many of us did. Thank you so much to Jeannie Zaino, our political contributor here at Bloomberg. Now we're going to get an analysis of what this stimulus package could mean for the U.S. economy. And for that, we turn to Catherine Mann. She is Citigroup Chief Global Economist. So welcome, Catherine. Great to have you back with us. I wanted to talk to you about the economy. We want to talk about the numbers. But before we get to that, what difference will it make whether we get this stimulus package or we don't get it?
Well, they really will make a huge difference in terms of getting the package. Just in terms of the extension of the unemployment benefits is a critical component because so many people are still unemployed and they're depending on those benefits in order to make their rent payments, put food on the table. And so that's a critical ingredient. The stimulus, the $600, frankly, from an economics perspective, that's not the most important part of the program. It would have been better to spend a little bit more money on the unemployment benefits because those are the people who really need it. It is a political process, and you have to kind of take it as it is. Again, the PPP program to support small business, it would have been better if we could have actually just gotten the money to the businesses as opposed to having to have the ties associated with it. But, again, political process means that half a loaf is better than none.
So if, in fact, it doesn't happen, and I think it's too early to say it won't happen, but if it doesn't happen, are we looking at a double-dip recession here?
Well, the momentum going into the first quarter, the final quarter of this year, the data still to come, and the first quarter of next year, the momentum is really pretty strong in the economy, tailing off a little bit in the data that you saw today. But nevertheless, we've got an awful lot of momentum. There is a lot of saving available still to be drawn on. Credit card, payments can also be extended. And so the momentum probably will keep the U.S. economy from having a double dip. It's different, for example, from Europe, where the double dip is much more likely. So I think we've got the momentum going, but you hate to leave everything going flat into next year because it's not going to be easier to get this done next year.
That seems fair to say. So putting aside from that, let's assume once again we get this stimulus package. It's $908 billion. What are you looking at for next year, 2021? I mean, we had obviously a disastrous second quarter, a big surge back, a really quite remarkable surge back in Q3, but we're still well behind where we started out.
Well, so going into the second half of next year, we're looking for being close to where we were pre-COVID if you look at the GDP numbers. But, GDP is an aggregate of an awful lot of different sectors of the economy. And what we've seen is much stronger retail sales as people rotate out of services spending and into, buying things for their home, buying things, cars and so forth, durable goods. That rotation is what is keeping GDP from looking worse than it would be. But if we have continued softness in the services sector, again, tremendous collapse in services, tremendous contraction. And we have to remember that the U.S. economy runs on services. 67 cents of every dollar that a household spends is on services. And so we've got to have that come back. That is a function both of people having money to spend, but also being willing to go out and spend it on services, that's where the vaccine comes in. That's where some of the concerns about people getting vaccinated, changing their behavior. And that's where we, kind of worry about the going forward into the latter half of the year, particularly in light of, as I say, concerns about the vaccine acceptance and delivery and whether or not businesses will be ready to take on the demand. Unemployment, we don't see that recovering.
Sorry?
We don't. That's the other thing. GDP might recover by the middle of the next year back to where it was at the beginning of this year. So a full year and a half of recession, or below pre-COVID level of GDP. But unemployment, we're not going to see strength of the labor market going into 2022, 2023. So again, bifurcation between GDP and employment, bifurcation between durables, retail sales, and services.
Yeah, it's one of the things you've pointed out is the various asymmetries, even around the globe, that some parts are coming back, some places are not coming back. One of my questions is, we have to have the services, for example, come back. Are we sure it will come back? In this sense, could we do some permanent damage to parts of the economy? And as we look at small businesses going out of business, small restaurants, various leisure and entertainment facilities, is it possible we just won't come back in some parts of the economy?
Well, again, services is a pretty big category. We've got health services, discretionary health services. I think there will be the recovery there. You've got leisure and hospitality. I actually think people desperately want to go on vacation. I think they want a vacation outside of their own house. So, that will come back. I think entertainment, entertainment in person, sports, Broadway, concerts, people want to go back and be in the real life. So those will come back. There are other services. Restaurants will come back. It will be a different configuration of restaurants, though. I think a lot of the smaller ones will not come back. Some consolidation of the chains, I think, is what we could be looking for in terms of that component of services. Business services, a lot of them are going to be done by Zoom, so it's a different kind of business service.
Catherine, you also mentioned
Yes.
Europe, and I wonder about the sort of asynchronous growth. We like to have synchronous growth globally, but right now it looks like Asia may be doing pretty well. We're limping along, sort of recovering, but more slowly perhaps than we liked, and Europe seems to be the laggard. Does that put some limitation on our overall ability to grow the economy globally?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the synchronous global growth is something that we've been looking for quite some time. And yes, Asia coming out sooner, the U.S. In the middle of next year. But, the euro area has been delayed, or, the timetable for returning to the pre-COVID level of GDP has been delayed off into the second half of 2022. So you've got three major engines of the global economy really in asynchronous timetables. And that means you don't get any beneficial spillovers from one area to the next. It puts a greater premium on domestic demand within economies, pulling up their own bootstraps. But, that doesn't work for every economy. And, it would be better if we were all coming out of this COVID crisis at the same time. But it doesn't seem to be in the cards, and that creates some fragility at the global level.
Catherine, it's always a pleasure to have you with us, and I hope you have a great holiday. That's Catherine Mahon. She is Chief Global Economist for Citigroup. Coming up here, we talk with Dr. Anthony Fauci of the NIH about that vaccine program. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Western. Hundreds of thousands of Americans are being inoculated around the country even as we speak, and it couldn't happen too soon given the surge in the coronavirus all around the country. We talked to Dr. Anthony Fauci of the National Institutes of Health about the vaccine program overall, and quite specifically about his own personal experience because he got vaccinated just yesterday, and we asked him how he felt.
For at least 5 or 6 hours after the injection, I didn't feel anything at all. I mean, less so than a flu vaccine. Then a late afternoon, early evening, I started to get a little bit of an ache, really nothing to distract me or bother me, but just something that when I press on it, you could actually feel it. Had a good night's sleep last night. I didn't get, a lot of muscle aches or anything. I mean, I felt something a little different, like there was something going on, like maybe a little warm, a little flushed. Woke up this morning, I feel perfectly fine. The only thing I have now is that where the injection site is still is a little sore. But when I say sore, I mean really not very distractingly sore, just baseline, borderline.
If there are side effects, how quickly would they kick in?
They usually all occur within the first 12 hours and they last between 24 and at the most 36 hours. It's extremely unusual for someone to have something beyond 36 to 48 hours.
Now, you said in getting your inoculation, it was for two reasons. First of all, you are a physician, you were actually treating patients. But secondly, you wanted it to really represent to people that this truly is safe. We don't need to be worried about it. Do you have a sense that there is much resistance at this point in the vaccination program?
It's getting better, thank goodness. When we did surveys, a month or so ago, there was almost 50% of the people had some reservations or skepticism about getting vaccinated. The last survey, which was just last week, they said that more than 65% of the people said that they would be willing to get the vaccine. We really want to get that up even much higher than that, because the projection is that if you get anywhere between 70 and 85% of the population vaccinated, you would create an umbrella of immunity over the community, which could really get the level of virus so low that it would not be a threat. And then you could answer the question that everyone seems to be asking appropriately, is that when can we start approaching some degree of normality? When can we be doing things like safely having the children in school, or going to a restaurant and sitting indoors, or going to a movie theater? I would think if we start getting the general population vaccinated, let's say mid-April, between now and then, we're going through the various priorities. We started off healthcare providers and people in nursing homes and long-term facilities. The second level is people over 75 and individuals in what's called necessary or important places in society to keep society running. And that could be anything from a police officer to a fireman to someone who runs a grocery store so people can get food. When you get through those priorities and you get to what I call open season, like anybody can get the vaccination, even though you're not in a priority group, I imagine that's probably going to be sometime in April. And then if we can really get vaccines going in April, May, June, July, and August, by the time we get to the end of the summer, I think we can get to that goal that I'm talking about getting the overwhelming majority of the population vaccinated.
And we will have more of my interview with Dr. Fauci later in the program. In the meantime, Congress facing off against the president on a major stimulus bill. We're going to talk with former U.S. Ambassador to China, also former U.S. Senator Max Baucus. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Max Baucus served for some 36 years in the U.S. Senate from his home state of Montana and then went on to be our U.S. ambassador to Beijing. And we welcome him now back to Bloomberg. Ambassador Baucus, thank you so much for being with us. I want to talk about China, but before that, I have to talk about that news from last night as President Trump went on Twitter, had a streamed video in which he said that he didn't like this stimulus bill at all because there was far too little money being given in direct payments. He wanted $2,000 a person within $600. He did not say he was going to veto. But what is the risk, do you think, that he might veto? And if so, would Congress override it?
Well, it's always risky. President Trump is unpredictable. His actions are unsurprising. It is what it is. We've had no president like him. Thank God, though, we have a deadline. That's virtually the end of the year. If we didn't have a deadline, we'd be worrying about whether or not we could pass a coronavirus bill or not. But that deadline, end of the year, is going to make a difference. Will he veto this bill? He may. He may, just for attention, to stir things up. Will the veto be overridden? I tend to think that it will be, but don't know for sure. A lot of the Republicans, they're beholden to the Trump base. On the other hand, they're more beholden to their electors generally, and they know he's going to be out of office soon. So they may decide to override the veto for the better interest of the country, and basically they can help their reelection chances down the road.
So, Mr. Ambassador, let's turn to China, which you know so terribly well. We now have a President-elect Biden. We're going to have President Biden have a policy toward China. If you're advising him right now, how do you advise him go about that?
Well, I've learned when I served in China that the Chinese understand and respect strength more than do any other people, and they understand and respect weakness more than any other people. And that clearly means that the United States has to be very strong with respect to China, but strong in the best sense of the term. And by that I mean not just militarily, which clearly is important, but also economically. Build up our base in the U.S., our education system, try to reduce inequality in income in the U.S., infrastructure, new infrastructure, quantum mechanics, quantum computers, artificial intelligence, et cetera, and work with our allies together, work in concert with our allies as best we can. That kind of strength will go a long way in helping China realize, maybe we can't push the United States around very much anymore. Second, we Americans very much need a strategic long-term policy with respect to China. We haven't had one in the past. As we've been too ad hoc. We react too much to China. But if we have a longer-term strategic plan, how do we deal with China, that will also make a big difference.
Well, it's interesting you suggest that, because I've heard other people say we need a longer-term plan. Goodness knows, from what I can see, the Chinese, they think in decades rather than months. often with their policies. What would that sort of strategic plan look like? I mean, they are the rising economy. They will surpass us at some point in the not too far distant future. How do we figure out a way that we can mutually coexist and even benefit one another without one being dominant over the other?
Well, that's a very good point. Ideally, we would want to coexist with China. There's going to be some competition. China's very proud. We're very proud, too. Their system is much different from ours, so there will be some competition. Ideally, it's competition where we compete amicably, compete in a way where we're not trying to do the other one in. It's very, very disadvantageous for the United States to send a signal that we want to stop China's rise. When we send that signal that we want to stop China's rise, that just emboldens the hawks in China, emboldens Chinese to dig in their heels even more and to be even more antagonistic. My contacts, my friends in China tell me that they are very happy with the Biden win. I ask why, and the answer I get is, well, Biden win shows that American democracy lives. I ask, why is that important? And the answer I get back from my Chinese friends is, well, that strengthens the hands of the reformers in China. Because if a Biden presidency indicates a president wants to work with, certainly he's going to stand up for America, as he should, American national security especially, but still a president who works through ordinary channels, a president who they understand, a president they trust, his word is good, and that will strengthen the hands of the reformers in China. And I hope that that is what happens if some reformers decide maybe they want to work with America more after all.
Mr. Ambassador, if it's important to be strong and appear strong with the Chinese, have we done ourselves some damage through this massive cyber attack, apparently from Russia, not from China, but still showing how vulnerable we are in this country?
Well, I do think the cyber attack is from Russia. It's not from China. The bigger problem for me is it shows generally how vulnerable all systems are in the world today to outside hackers. It's very difficult. There are groups in the United States, and to some degree working with Chinese, to try to develop norms in the cyber world, to try to define, guardrails, try to set up some way so we have some way to make this not be the Wild West, but where there's some understanding of what's permissible and what's not permissible. And I think that's critical. We have to work as hard as we can, not only as a country, but with other countries as well.
No question. Mr. Ambassador, always a pleasure having you with us. That's Ambassador Max Baucus. Wish you a very happy holidays. In the meantime, coming up here is going to be Darren Williams from Southern Bancorp talking about the role of CDFIs in the new stimulus package. That's coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on Bloomberg Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. It's time now for Bloomberg First Word News, and for that we go to Karina Mitchell. Karina?
David, on Capitol Hill, Speaker Nancy Pelosi says the House plans to vote Thursday on a bill to replace the $600 stimulus checks in this week's pandemic relief package with a $2,000 payment President Trump has called for. Pelosi says Trump should put pressure on his fellow Republican Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy to agree to ask House members to unanimously pass the measure. Meanwhile, New York City will be keeping a close eye on travelers arriving in the city from the UK to make sure that they quarantine. Mayor Bill de Blasio says all visitors arriving at New York City's airports will fill out forms that will be forwarded to the state. Every traveler also will receive a city health department order to quarantine. De Blasio says sheriff deputies will visit the homes and hotels of all travelers from the UK. And the UK and European Union are on the brink of sealing a historic post-Brexit trade accord. Bloomberg has learned negotiators have agreed on the outline of a deal and are putting the finishing touches on an agreement. Discussions had been continuing on fisheries, which was the biggest sticking point. The clock is ticking towards a December 31st deadline when, if no deal, the UK will leave the single market. Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is putting more of England into lockdown. The government is imposing tougher coronavirus regulations in an effort to stamp down on the mutant strain of coronavirus that's spreading quickly across the country. Health Secretary Matt Hancock says a new variant is spreading, quote, at a dangerous rate, putting the rise in cases in the past week at 57%. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Karina Mitchell. This is Bloomberg. David.
Thank you so much, Karina. Well, community development financial institutions, or CDFIs, play a really critical role in our financial systems, particularly addressing the needs of small businesses and some of the underserved and underprivileged communities around the country. Welcome now back to Bloomberg, the head of one of those CDFIs. He is Darren Williams, and he is the CEO of Southern Bancorp, which services the Mississippi Delta and the Arkansas Delta. Thanks so much for being back with us, Darren. Good to have you with us. We've got this stimulus package that we think may be going forward, although President Trump has raised some questions about it. Assuming it does go forward as it currently exists, what would be the role of CDFIs in that? How would it change your business?
Well, David, first of all, thanks for having us on again. This legislation has an unprecedented amount of support for CDFIs. Some $12 billion would go to support CDFIs, not really CDFIs, but the communities and the people that we serve. So there's about $9 billion in a capital investment program that would go to CDFI banks and credit unions to strengthen their capital base. And then about $3 billion in emergency funding and grant support, technical assistance support to allow us to help those that we serve recover from this pandemic.
So is this one subject that has truly bipartisan support? Is this supported both by Republicans and Democrats as well?
Well, CDFIs have experienced an unprecedented amount of attention from a number of folks, but in Congress, on both the Republican side and the Democratic side of the aisle, for years, we have always enjoyed bipartisan support. So, yes, this is broad-based bipartisan support for the CDFI industry.
So if these funds come through, what are you going to do with them?
Well, David, we're going to be able to strengthen and deepen our impact, reach even further and deeper into the markets that we serve. Of course, CDFIs and minority depository institutions, we serve low and moderate income census communities that were struggling prior to the pandemic, and even much more now that we're battling with this pandemic. So we're going to reach deeper into the markets we serve, provide deeper and more assistance to those that we have the privilege of serving.
Yeah, fascinating. It talks about the Biden administration, which is coming in come January 20. There was a report that the designee, at least for Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, has already had a discussion with some CDFIs. I think you may have been part of that. What did you learn from that?
Well, David, that's correct, and really, really optimistic about the relationship that we'll have with the Biden administration. For us, the Treasury nominee Yellen to meet with us and our Deputy Secretary to meet with us, that sends a strong signal. They completely understand the important role that CDFIs play in the overall U.S. economy, and even more so, her role. As a Fed governor, she showed a real interest in this area, and also the Deputy Secretary. He has experience in working with CDFIs in his role on a affordable housing fund in D.C. So we think we have an administration that understands the true importance of CDFIs, and that married with the strong bipartisan support that we have in Congress, that's going to be good for CDFIs, but more importantly, good for the people that we serve.
So, Darren, you are well known for having very hands-on relationships with a lot of your banking customers down there in the Mississippi and the Arkansas Delta. Give us a sense of how your people are doing.
Well, I can tell you, they're excited that this support may be coming. Our small businesses, they're struggling, particularly those that are in the restaurant and food service industry. And so in this new legislation, there's $284 billion in the second round of Paycheck Protection dollars that will go to help those businesses survive and thrive and keep their employees on the payroll. So that's important. Just this past week, one of my small business bars reached out to me and just said, I'm just struggling. I can't make it. It's a restaurant and my numbers are down. Is there any additional relief that you can provide for me? Because the first round of Paycheck Protection dollars, they've been exhausted. And so we were able to provide an interest-only payment for that borrower and that small business with the second round of Paycheck Protection dollars. It's going to be able to make it, keep their employees employed, and really survive through this pandemic.
Are we going to lose some of those small businesses forever, as it were?
Unfortunately, I think that's the case. So the New York Fed had a recent study that said that almost half of Black businesses would permanently close as a result of this pandemic. Unfortunately, we've seen some that have not made it. and many others will not. But we're going to do all we can to work with those small businesses that we serve to help them make it through this pandemic and hopefully build back better on the other side.
Is there anything that actually could help them coming out of this? I mean, we always look at crises like this as sometimes an opportunity to rethink some things, to redirect ourselves, and actually come out stronger the other side, because we all do believe there will be another side.
Right. Well, David, you'd never bet against the American entrepreneur. And so many of these small businesses that we serve, particularly in the rural communities we serve, they've always been very entrepreneurial. They have a very entrepreneurial spirit. They've figured out how to make it. Having to operate in a different manner. They've reached out and expanded their markets through the internet, and I think they'll be able to capitalize on the things they've learned through this pandemic to help them go forward in business in the future.
And finally, just give us a sense about the health situation, the public health situation down there. How bad is the coronavirus there? We've seen it really pop up various places around the country in pretty horrific ways.
Yes, so the markets we serve, unfortunately, we're seeing a spike like around the country. But even more important, the health concerns we're seeing now, which are very, very important. The Sergo Ventures, it's a research company. They created what's called a COVID vulnerability index, and they looked at not just the health impacts, but the long-term impacts to the economy, to education, and they've mapped the country. And we see in the markets we serve, we're some of the most vulnerable markets in America. And so we're concerned, yes, about the healthcare impacts. We're also concerned about the long-term impacts overall to the markets that we serve.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your being with us as always. I hope you have a really good holiday in a very different circumstance. Thanks so much to Darren Williams. He's the CEO of Southern Bancorp. Coming up here, we're going to have more of my interview with Dr. Anthony Fauci, including about that new strain of coronavirus that's been detected over in England. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. When we talked with Dr. Anthony Fauci at NIH earlier today, he said that we are on the course, if things go well, to being back to some form of normal by the end of the summer. But at the same time, he said there were some risks to that timeline.
There's a lot of contingencies and ifs here. One of the big if is that the supply of the vaccines that we think is on target continue. We don't get any glitches in production, because if we have a glitch in production, then the expected number of doses don't arrive. Even though people want to get vaccinated, you're not going to vaccinate them. So the two things that are important: A, production goes along the way we hope it will, and I think it will. And number two, a substantial proportion of the people continue to want to get vaccinated.
As far as you're concerned right now, is there anything that we could do as a government, as a society, to expedite that, to have even more production or more distribution?
Yes, that's a good question. In fact, what we're doing is that we're negotiating in contractual negotiations with the companies that are already providing a substantial number of doses to see if we can get yet again another added amount from that company. We're negotiating with Pfizer, we're negotiating with Moderna, as well as other companies, to try and get the numbers higher than what the original projection was.
Now you do science, you do medicine, you don't do politics. At the same time, in this stimulus package, there is money put aside for vaccines. As I understand, around $8 or $9 billion for vaccine distribution, maybe another as much as $20 billion, I've heard, for testing and tracing. Give us a sense, as a public health official, how important that money is right now. How badly is it needed?
Well, thank you for asking that question. It is definitely needed, because vaccine distribution is a critical issue. Because A, you could produce, first of all, there are multiple steps. Is the vaccine safe and effective? Well, thank goodness it is not only safe and effective, it is highly efficacious, 94 to 95%. So we're starting off, luckily, with a really good product. The next thing is producing it. The next thing is distributing it, getting it to where it needs to go. And then the third thing is at the local public health level, getting it into the arms of individuals. And that can be a complicated issue. It's very easy to do when you go to the hospital and you say, we're going to vaccinate healthcare providers. They're all there. They all come to work. They're all healthcare providers. You line them up and you stick it in their arm. But when you got to go out into the community, particularly in those communities that don't have good access to healthcare, those are the situations that are going to require resources to help expedite the distribution of vaccine to those people.
Well, that's such an important point. Pick up on it. Again, as a public health official, some of the communities that have been hit the hardest have been the most vulnerable. They tend to be minorities. They tend to be lower income. Often those people don't have regular health care to begin with. It's not like they have a regular physician that they call up and ask for advice like that. What do we need to do to overserve that underserved part of the community?
Well, you've got to get personnel into the community. You've got to get resources to set up facilities that can actually be doing the vaccination, whatever they may be. That may be through a church in the community. That may be through a high school gymnasium or auditorium in the community. Those are the things that you've got to put resources in to get them working, because they don't happen spontaneously.
We learned this week, actually last weekend, about a new strain of the coronavirus that they found in England. The Prime Minister Boris Johnson came out and said, this is a real problem. They've shut down a lot of Southeast England. They've even shut down some of the relations with the travel coming in and out of England. What do we know about this new strain? How new is it?
Well, it's new in that the people in the UK, the Brits, noticed it, as you said, about a few weeks ago. It is dominating the situation in the southeastern part of the UK. It seems to be the suggestion that it may be transmitted more easily and more efficiently because the mutation is at an area that allows it to bind more efficiently to the receptor on the cell that allows you to get infected. Looking at whether or not it makes individuals more severely ill, according to these preliminary reports, no, that does not seem to be the case. The next question one asks is that does the mutation interfere with the efficacy of a vaccine in inducing protection? Thus far, there's no indication that that's the case. However, having said that, we need to take this seriously and we need to investigate it much further. As you and I are speaking now, that's going on in a very intense way, both in the UK, here in the United States. We at the NIH are in communication with our colleagues in the UK to try and get the isolate to work with so that we can do the kinds of experiments that would give us a better feel for what the ultimate impact might be. So bottom line is we are all over this, but it is something we need to keep our eye on and take seriously.
The CEO of BioNTech, the partner to Pfizer for the first vaccine, has said that if in fact, and he said he's not sure that it's necessary, but if they needed to modify the vaccine for this new strain, it would take something like 6 weeks. Does that sound reasonable to you? And then what would the approval process be of that new modification of the Pfizer vaccine?
Well, you know, when you have that's actually an interesting thing with regard to vaccinology. We've gone through all of the appropriate hoops. So let's take the Pfizer product. There were 44,000 people in the Pfizer trial. It was shown to be highly efficacious and safe. So if they take that same vaccine construct and just essentially pull out one of the components and stick in the new one, as they were saying, they said that that would take them 6 weeks to ramp it up, test it for safety in a bunch of people and say, we're good to go. I don't think that's unreasonable. I mean, they'd have to really move quickly, but I don't think that that's unreasonable to be able to do that. It's going to be dependent on the regulatory authorities who say, since we have so much data on the original product, we don't really need that much more data. This is just a variation of a strain change. And the terminology, strain change in regulatory authorities like the FDA means much, much, much less going through the hoops to get it approved than if you get a brand new vaccine. We do that with flu vaccines every year. What we're doing is a strain change. So you don't have to go through a big clinical trial every single year when you change the flu vaccine.
One of the questions raised by this UK development is what's the smart response, the effective response? As you say, it appears perhaps it's more contagious, although perhaps not more virulent. We saw any number of countries now saying, please don't have any flights coming in from England. France, for a time, even banned cargo shipments, although that's come off. What is prudent as a practical matter?
You know, that's being very actively discussed. I mean, many of us, I think myself included, think right now at this point, completely shutting down travel from countries like the UK might just be an overreach a bit. Maybe not. Maybe we'll reach a point where we have to do that. But right now, I don't think that's the case. One of the things that's being very actively discussed is the idea that in order for a person to come from the UK to the United States, before they board the plane, they have to have a very recent negative COVID-19 test, so that you're not stopping them from traveling, but they're saying the only way you're going to get into the country is if right before you get on the flight, you have a documented negative test. In fact, Governor Cuomo, as you know, is asking for that for flights from the UK to New York City.
As a practical matter, given the fact that it appears that this new strain in the UK has been there for a while now, is it likely it's already in Europe and the United States?
Well, I have said, and I will stand by that we don't know if it's here. We're doing surveillance sequencing to see if it's here. But I had said, and I still feel that way, I would not be surprised, given the prevalence of this in the UK, that we already have cases here at a low level that we haven't detected yet. Not proven, but I would not be surprised if we did.
What is the possibility or likelihood that, in fact, this is only one of several strain changes, as you put it? There were reports, I believe, out of South Africa about a different strain that might not be more contagious, but actually be more virulent. I think a higher, what do you call it, vaccine load, or I'm sorry, virus load?
Right. So you're bringing up a very good point. When you have a lot of virus circulating in any society, the chances are not the chances are, but the inevitability is that you're going to get a lot of mutations. Sooner or later, one of those mutations is going to attract attention of something that might be a functional change. So the fact that you have the emergence of this mutant in the UK really tells us that sooner or later we're going to get more mutants, because that's what happens when viruses that are RNA viruses replicate rapidly and extensively. You will get mutants, and then mutants, one way or another, sooner or later, are going to have a functional relevance. So I wouldn't be surprised, particularly in our own country, forgetting the UK for a moment. We have so much virus in the United States. Just look at our numbers. Between 200 and 300,000 new cases each day, 2,000 to 3,000 deaths each day, 118,000 hospitalization. So there's enough opportunity in our own country for these mutations to occur that I would not be surprised, as we continue to look for them, we're going to see similar mutations.
And we will have more of my interview with Dr. Anthony Fauci of NIH in our second hour of Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. It's time now to check in on the markets. And for that, we go to Abigail Doolittle. Abigail, I'll tell you, when I heard about President Trump last night raising questions about stimulus, I thought the markets really take a hit. It looks like they're kind of looking past it, aren't they?
Would have to agree with you on that, David. And it is interesting to see that reaction. And I think it might have to do with the dollar. We were talking about earlier this week how a strong dollar was hurting stocks. Today, we have the dollar down and we have a rally for stocks. We have the S&P 500 up about 0.6%. We also have the Russell 2000 higher, hitting a record high. On the other hand, you have the NASDAQ slightly lower. But in this year, David, as you know, that's actually a bullish phenomenon because big tech is considered to be defensive. So you have investors going into the banks, the bank index up sharply on the day, right now up about 3%. This, of course, as yields are rising. So you have bonds selling off. It is risk on the day, despite that threat that President Trump may veto that stimulus. Whether traders think that it's not going to happen, it's entirely unclear, but really not paying any attention to it. And, you know, if we go across asset class, David, I was just mentioning how the dollar is down. I think that this is really why you have stocks up for the first time in 4 days. The dollar is down. That's also helping crude oil. And, of course, on the news that the Brexit negotiators have reached an outline for that historic trade deal, you have the pound absolutely soaring. So weak volume, so not a lot of folks doing this trading, but those who are there, the bulls are out today, David.
Yeah, at the same time, the yield on the 10 years up, pushing up toward 1 again, right?
Yes, and that's something that's going to be a big story probably going into 2021, David, for sure. What will that mean for stocks? Well, we have a repricing of risk, but right now it's being taken as risk on with bonds selling off. But once above 1%, that'll be something to watch for sure, David.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Abigail Doolittle, for that report on the markets. Coming up in our second hour of Balance of Power, we're going to talk with Teresa Payton. She's the former Chief Information Officer at the White House. We're going to talk to her about that massive cyber attack reportedly from Russia. And we'll also have more of my interview with Dr. Anthony Fauci of the National Institutes of Health. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.